Hey everybody, welcome back to Code with Vinny. Today I'm going to be showing you how to build and deploy a full stack application from scratch. There are a lot of coding tutorials out there showing you how to build full stack applications, but in my opinion, a lot of them aren't that great, or they're extremely long and you don't even want to finish watching it or even get started in the first place. And I would say 90% of those tutorials never even show you how to deploy an application. So even if you finish the tutorial and you wanted to show it off to friends or a potential employer, it would be difficult for you to do so because you don't have the application deployed. So in this video, I hope to address all those concerns, and thank you for watching. So with that being said, let's get right into it. So as you can see, this is the application. Essentially, it's a task list or to-do list. And it's not extremely complex as far as functionality of the application, right? You can create to-dos, like clean car, right? So I can create this to-do, and you'll see it appear. And you can mark to-dos as done or undo them. You can go and edit to-dos, so I can go in here and say instead of make bed, I can do create tutorial, and we can see I've successfully edited that. Or I can go ahead and delete a to-do as well, right? Or a task. And that's essentially all of the functionality of the application, which doesn't seem like a lot potentially. But if you go through this tutorial and you understand the concepts that I'm teaching you, especially create, read, update, and delete, also known as CRUD, that means you have the ability to build projects that are a lot more complex. So you can either add on to this project or create a new full stack project that is a lot more complicated. Because if you really think about it, really complicated applications like Twitter or X, if you want to call it that, is a really powerful application. But at the end of the day, basically everything that they're doing is coming down to create, read, update, and delete, right? You can create tweets, obviously you can read them, you can update them now, I believe, and obviously delete. Oftentimes these really impressive applications come down to these same concepts that I'm teaching you today. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to close out of this real quick and create a new folder on my desktop, and we are going to call that task list. Okay, and then I'm just going to go and open Visual Studio Code, and we're just going to drag that file we just created into Visual Studio Code, and that will go ahead and open that directory, this task list directory in Visual Studio Code, which is exactly what we want. Next, we're going to go ahead and start making our project structure. So you're going to go up here and you're going to create a new folder, and this first one we're going to create is called API. And then we're going to create another folder, and we're going to call that one UI. So essentially, this API folder is going to hold our Express app, or our API, and our UI folder is going to hold our ReactApp. Okay. So what we're going to want to do now is open our terminal in VS Code. So if you're on Mac, the command is Control backtick, and you're just going to run a CD into the UI directory. So I'm just going to run CD UI, and you can see that it says UI right here. So I'm successfully in the correct directory now. And then I'm going to run the command npx create ReactApp space period, and that's going to go ahead and create a ReactApp in our current directory, which in our case is the UI folder. And that might take a little bit of time to finish, don't worry about it. Once your terminal looks like mine, that means you're done. So we now have a React application in our UI folder. You can see all these files it creates for us. And if we go into our terminal and run the command npm start, it will actually open up our React app for us. So let me drag this over really quick. So on localhost 3000, you can see we have our React app running. So everything looks good right now. We're going to go ahead and stop running this React app though with Control C. Now we want to go back into the terminal and run the command rm space -rf space .git. And what this is going to do is remove Git from our UI folder. Basically, because we have a mono repo, we want Git to be in the root directory, so the task list directory, and not the UI directory. When you have nested Git repositories, you can run into issues. If you don't understand what that means, don't really worry about it for now. It's not a big deal. So now we're going to want to install all our dependencies for our React app. So one thing we're going to be using for this project is Material UI. So all I did was go to the Material UI website, and under installation they give you some instructions. So I'm just going to install this, right? Just going to copy that, paste it in my terminal, install that, and we're going to skip this. And we also are going to use Material UI icons as well. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And we'll go ahead and install that as well. And then there are a couple other libraries that we're going to be using. So we're just going to run npm install, or you can just do npm I like this. And then type in Axios, and then space, class names. So those are two different libraries we're going to install. And that should be everything we need. Now we're going to go through and get rid of a bunch of files that we don't need. So Create React App created a bunch of files for us. So we're going to go ahead and open our source folder and just get rid of a bunch of this stuff. So let's go ahead and get rid of all of these files except for index.js, index.css, and app.js. So everything else we're going to get rid of. Okay. Yeah, we'll delete this as well. Doesn't really matter. Okay. Alright. And then we are going to go inside our app.js, and we're going to delete these two imports because they are no longer there. And we're going to delete everything besides the two, or the main div. And we'll just go in here and type hello world. Okay. And then we can get rid of all of this CSS as well. And we are going to get rid of this web vitals, get rid of this React strict node. Okay. And everything else looks good. So now that we've made a bunch of changes, let's go and make sure that our React app will still start. So I went and ran npm start in the terminal, and we can see that our React app is working, and all we get is a blank page with hello world, which is exactly what we want. Okay, now let's actually start building out our components. So let's go back to our code, and then we're actually going to create a folder called components. And in this folder, we're actually going to create 3 files. So the first one is going to be called add task form.js. And then we're going to create another one called task.js. And then one last file called update task form.js. So this is going to be all of our components for our application. So before we actually start building out our components, I want to make sure that we have a couple extensions that are going to make our life easier. And the first one is this right here, React Redux React Native Snippets. It's going to make it a lot quicker for you to build out your components. And then one that's also nice is Prettier. I would recommend that you have both those extensions because it'll be a lot faster. But anyways, let's get back to it. So you're just going to go over to this first file, add task form. You're going to type in React Arrow Function Component, RAFC, and it's going to go ahead and create our component for us. Okay, so now to help us build out our form a little bit faster, we're going to use Material UI to help us out. So I'm just going to go to the browser and type in Material UI. And when we go here, you can see that these are a bunch of components that they have pre-built that we can just steal from them basically. So that's the benefit of using Material UI. And it scales really well, like if you're on a mobile device or anything like that. So we are going to take a text field from them. It's going to be the first thing. And we want to steal this text field. So I'm just going to expand the code, right? And take this first text field because that's this one. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this import real quick. Import that, and then steal this text field. Okay. And the reason I'm showing you guys me Googling that instead of just typing it all out, because in reality I don't have everything memorized, and this is what real developers do. So I want you guys to understand how you can go about doing this on your own instead of just copying everything I'm doing. Okay, so let's go back to our app.js, and we're actually going to call our add task form. So I'm just going to go add task form, and it will automatically import it for me like that. Okay, and now let's go check our React app to see what it looks like. And you can see we have this nice input field now. That's the benefit of using Material UI. The one thing I notice is that this is light mode, and we want it to be dark mode for our project because it looks better. So what I'm going to do is go into the browser again and type in Material UI dark theme. And I'm just going to go to this first suggestion, and you can see it tells us exactly how we want to do this. So this is our app. So I'm just going to steal all of this code actually. Go to our app.js and replace this. And instead of having this main, I'm actually going to add our add task form again. And now let's go take a look at our React app. Yep, so now we have dark theme, as easy as that. Okay, so let's go finish out our add task form. So we're just going to go back to the code, go to add task form, and we're going to use another Material UI component called topography. And you can see it's already suggesting it for us. And we're just going to type in my task list as the name of this typography, and then we're going to go ahead and add a couple props. So after you've added all the props, we're going to go down here and add a button component from Material UI as well. Okay, and this button is actually going to have an icon in it. So earlier we actually installed our dependency to use our icons, but we need to go find our icon that we actually want to use. So Material UI icons. Alright, we just go right here, and it's pretty intuitive. You just search, and we're going to steal this one. So it'll give us our import. We'll go and copy that, add our import to the top, and then we can simply use this add icon within our button, just like this. Add icon. Perfect. So we want to go and fix some of our props, like this label says outlined. We don't want it to say that. We'll just have it say task. That's good enough for now. We don't need this ID, doesn't do anything for us. We actually want to change the size of this to small. And we're actually going to need something to keep track of the value that's in our text field. So we're just going to go up here and type in use state. And that should pull up the use state snippet, and it will kind of make it a little faster for us. And we're just going to call this new task. Hit tab, and then we're just going to make this an empty string. And we can see use state isn't imported, so we're just going to go up here and type in use state. That should fix that for us. Now we're going to go back down to our text field and type in value and make it equal to new task. But we also need our value to change whenever we type, so we're going to add an onChange handler, and you're just going to put an arrow function in here with E, and then you're going to type in set new task, and we're going to set the new task to e.target.value. There you go. So now we just have to fix up our button a little bit, so we're just going to go down here and type in variant, just like the text field has. We're going to go outlined. And this needs an on-click handler, so the button knows what to do when it's clicked. And we're going to create that function up here for it. So we're just going to go const add new task. Okay, that's going to be an arrow function. And for now, we can't fully set this up because we don't have the API set up, so we're just going to console.log add new task clicked. Something like that. Whatever you want it to be, it doesn't really matter. And we're just going to throw this into here. And lastly, we want to disable this button if nothing's typed in. We don't want to be able to submit if our form is incomplete. So we're just going to do disabled is equal to new task dot length. So now this file's basically done. We just need to add a little bit of CSS, and I don't want to take the time for to like write it all out with you guys, so just go ahead and copy it over from the GitHub repo. So when you have that copied over, we're going to go back to our add task form, and right before our text field, we're going to go ahead and add a div, and we are going to put our button and our text field inside this div. Okay, and we're just going to give this div a class name of add task form. Okay, so we're done working on this component for now, so let's go over to task, and we're going to create a new component over here called task, and this is going to be the component that's rendered every time we want to display a task. So it's going to need certain things like the name of the task and the completion status of the task. So we're going to go ahead and pass in a prop called task, which is going to have all that information on it. And we're going to go right here and gather that information so it's a little bit easier to use. We're going to go ID, name, and then completed. And we'll just destructure that from task, just like that. And we're also going to need a use state to keep track of the completion status changing. So we'll use our use state snippet, and we'll call this is complete. Okay, and we'll just make this completed. So whatever the status of the task that was passed in, we'll just use that. And I'm going to import this use state real quick, just like that. Okay, and we're going to go create another use state, and this one is going to be called is dialog open. This will make a little bit more sense later, and we're just going to set the default state to false. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and open up this div, and we're going to create a checkbox in here, and that's going to come from Material UI as well, and it's going to be self-closing. And we're going to add a property in this checkbox component called checked. This will show if the checkbox is checked or not, and we're going to pass it is complete. Okay, and then we're going to add another property on it called onChange, which is going to handle when the checkbox is checked and unchecked. And we are going to call this function handle update task completion. And for now, all this function is going to do is set is complete to the opposite of whatever the current value is. So we'll just do it like this. And then we're going to go ahead and take this function and pass it into our onChange. Now that we have a checkbox being rendered, the next thing we want to show is the name of the task. So we're going to use a typography for that, and we're going to make a variant of h4. And inside the tags, we're just going to put name. The next thing that we're going to want to do is create the edit and delete buttons. So I'm just going to go here and create a button. And both of these are going to have a variant of contained and an onClick. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. And then I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this line. So for our first onClick, we're just going to create an arrow function. And we're going to go ahead and set our is dialog open, set is dialog open to true. So basically when they click this button, it's going to open our dialog for us. And our other onClick is going to call a function called handle delete task, which we haven't created yet. So let's go up here and make that const, and we'll go handle delete task. We're not going to be able to finish this function until we get the API working, so I'm just going to add another console log, and we're just going to go delete task. Next, we're going to need to get the icons to put inside of our buttons. So we're going to go over to add task form real quick and just copy this add icon right here. It's basically going to be the same path, except we're going to have different names for our icons that we're using. So in this case, we're using the add icon, but in this case, we're going to have a delete icon. So we're just going to call this delete. And we'll just go delete icon right here. Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this line. And instead of delete, we're going to go edit this time. And now we will successfully have both of our icons. And we can go ahead and add them inside of our buttons now. So I'm going to go in here, and then I'm just going to go edit icon for the first one. And then in the second button, we're going to add the delete icon. Okay, and they're self-closing. And then on the second button, we're also going to add another prop called color. And we're going to set it equal to error, which is going to make it red. And then we're also going to call the update task form component in this file, but let's go and add the component here first. So it's exported. Now we can import it in our task file. So I'm just going to go here and import it. So update task form. So this component's going to take in 3 props. So after you added those 3 props, we're basically done with this file. We just have to add a couple more divs for CSS. So we're going to add a div around this checkbox in typography real quick. Just like that. And then we're also going to add a div around our 2 buttons. So another div like this. And then on the div that's surrounding our buttons, we're going to add a class name. And that class name is going to be task buttons. Just like that. And then we also are going to add a class name on this div over here. But we are actually going to use one of the libraries we installed earlier called class names. So we're just going to go to the top of this file and import class names from class names. Then we can go back down to our div and go class names, invoke it like a function. And the first parameter is going to be flex. And the second parameter is going to be an object with a key of done and a value of is complete. So basically this is going to allow us to add class names dynamically. So the first class, flex, is going to be applied always, but the second class called done is only going to be applied if is complete is true. And that done class is going to cross out the name of our task for us. Okay, and lastly, we're going to add a class name of task to our outermost div. Okay, so we're done with this file for now, so let's go ahead and get started on update task form. So if you remember earlier when we called this component, we passed in a few props. So let's go ahead and destructure them right here. And then we're going to have to use the ID and completed status off the task. So let's go ahead and destructure that as well, just to make our lives a little bit easier. And then we're going to need a use state to keep track of the new name of our task. And we'll just call this task name. And it'll just be an empty string. And then we're going to have to go and import our use state. So let's just do that real quick. And then we're going to go down to our return statement, and we're going to get rid of this div and add a dialog instead. And that's going to come from Material UI as well. And this is going to have a property called open. And we're going to set this to is dialog open. Now let's go ahead and open this up. And we're going to add a dialog title. That's going to come from Material UI as well. And inside there, we're going to put edit task. Then we're going to create a div with the class name dialog. Open that up, and then we're going to add a text field inside of it. And a button. So the text field is going to have a few props similar to what we did earlier. So size, small again, a label called task, a variant called outline, and then finally an onChange handler, which is going to have an arrow function that is going to set task name to e.target.value. And then this button's also going to have a few props, so we're going to give it variant as well. And then this is going to be contained, and then just an onClick handler, which is going to set isDialog open to false. And our button's going to need an icon in it, so let's go over to our task file, and we're just going to steal this import, this edit import, and we're just going to bring it over here. So instead of edit, it's going to say check. Everything else is going to be the same. So let's go over here, check icon. Okay, and I'm just going to reorganize these imports. I like my React import to be at the top. There we go. And then we'll go in this button and we'll go check icon, just like that. So at this point, we're done with everything in our React app except our API calls, which we're going to finish later. Now would be a good time to go check our front end and make sure everything looks good. The thing is, we never actually call our task component, and our task component actually calls our update task form. So we're not going to see a lot of our UI unless we call it. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we're going to import task, invoke it here. And if we remember, task actually takes in a prop called task. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a fake task right now. So I'm going to go ID of 1, and then we'll go name and do dishes, and then it also has completed on it, and we'll just set that to false for now. And then we're going to go ahead and pass this task as a prop. So now we can go and take a look at our UI, because all of our components should be being rendered now. And we can see we have our task with do dishes. We can cross it out. We can open our edit dialog, and we can type in here, and it enables our button. We can click our button. So everything looks good. Now we can go ahead and get started on our API. So let's go back to the code. And for now, we can just kill our React app with Control-C. And we're going to do cd space ... and we're going to do cd space API. So now you can see we're in our API directory, and we're just going to run the command npm init. And it's going to ask us a bunch of questions. You can just hit enter, don't worry about it. So if we go ahead and open up our API now, you can see it created a package JSON for us. Now we're going to install all of our dependencies for our API. Let's make a couple quick changes to our package JSON. So what we're going to do is just delete this first script and replace it with start. And the script is just going to say node index. So that's going to start our API using Node. Then we're going to create another script called dev, and it's going to be development in all caps equals true space nodemon index. And this is going to set an environment variable called development equal to true, and this will make more sense later why we're going to do that. And then it's also going to start our application using nodemon. Nodemon basically allows us to hot reload our app. So if you're in development and you're testing your API, every time you make a change, it'll restart your server, so you don't manually have to kill it and restart it yourself. Under scripts, we're going to go ahead and create a new key value pair. The key is going to be type, and the value is going to be module. This allows us to use the same import syntax that we use in React instead of using require. That's it for our package JSON, so let's go to our API folder, and we're going to create a new file called .getignore. In this file, we can put names of folders and names of files that we don't want Git to keep track of. So we're just going to put node modules and dsstore. Now we can go ahead and get started on our Express server. So we're just going to go to the API, create another new file, and this one's going to be called index.js. And typically when I start creating my Express server, I usually just go to Google and I'll type in Express.js, and I'll go to hello world example, and I'll literally just steal all this. At this point we technically have a working Express server, but obviously we're going to want to make our own changes. So I'm going to go over here and put port 3001. Our ReactApp is running on port 3000, so we need them to be on different ports. That's just if you want to run it locally. And we're also going to use some middleware, so we're going to go down here and do app.use, and we're going to do express.json. You need this to grab the body of the requests when they come in. Without this line of code, you're not going to be able to access the body at all, so it's pretty important. Now our API is going to need 4 different routes for us to hit. I'm actually going to leave this initial route as hello world, just so when we deploy our API, it'll be quick to see if it's up and running and working correctly. But our 4 new routes are going to have the path of task, and they're all going to be async await functions. So this first route is going to be app.get, because that's going to fetch our data. The next one is going to be app.post, and that's going to actually create our data. The third route is going to be put, which is going to help us update our data. And the last one is going to be delete, which obviously would delete a task. Now we're going to make some helper functions that are going to actually talk to our database. So we're just going to create a new file and call it task.js. So in this file is where we're going to connect to our DynamoDB database. So I'm going to import a bunch of helper functions that's going to allow us to do that. So don't worry too much about what all this is right now, we're going to dive into it later. But if you want to see how I found out where to get these methods from in the first place, I'll have some links to the DynamoDB documentation in the README. So now we're going to need to make something called a client, which is going to allow us to communicate with DynamoDB. So we're just going to go const client. And if you're unsure what to put for the region, don't worry about it for now. When we get to the deployment phase, it'll be pretty obvious where you deployed your DynamoDB table to, what region you deployed it to, and you'll just add it in later. Not a big deal. And then we're going to have a document client that's going to make it easy for us to actually update our database. So we're just going to call it .client. And essentially we're going to use this .client to send our CRUD commands to the database. Now it's a little weird that we're creating these commands that communicate with the database even before we've actually created our database, but it's not a big deal because I know that our table is just going to have 3 attributes or 3 columns. The first one being ID, the second one name, and the third one completed, which we were using all on the front end. So we're now going to create our command that is going to help us fetch data from the database. In DynamoDB, when you want to fetch all the data from the database, it's called a scan. So that's why it's called the scan command. And we are going to go express attribute names. And we're just going to create an object right here. And the first key is going to be hashtag name. And the value is just going to be name. Now we also need a projection expression. This is basically asking us what attributes do we want to get back. And so we're going to go ID, hashtag name, and then completed. And the reason we have to use hashtag name instead of just normal name is because name is a reserved keyword in DynamoDB, and if we want to use it, we have to use that hashtag syntax. And lastly, we just have to add our table name, which is just going to be called tasks. So now we have successfully created our command, and we just need to get the response when we send it off to the database. So we're just going to go response is equal to await.client, and we are just going to pass in our command. Now that we're holding our response in a variable, we're just going to return response. And we have successfully created our fetch function. So we're going to need 3 more functions. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this really quick. And I'm just going to delete everything in the middle after new. And then I'm going to go ahead and paste this 2 more times. We're going to call this function create task. This one's going to be update task. And the last one is going to be delete task. So in DynamoDB, if we want to add an item in our database, we use the put command. And it just needs two pieces of information. The first one is going to be table name. And this is going to be the same. It's just going to be tasks. And the second thing it needs is the item we're going to be inserting. So like I said before, each task is going to have an ID. It's going to have a name. And it's going to have a completed status. So this ID is actually going to be what DynamoDB calls a partition key, and it should be unique. So the way we're going to go about generating a random unique ID is by using a library called crypto, which you don't have to install. It just comes already with Node. So it's just going to be crypto from crypto, just like that. And we can go back down to our create task and go const UUID, which is basically a unique ID, and we're going to go crypto dot random UUID, and we're going to use this UUID right here. And then name and completed are actually going to get passed into this function, so we're just going to destructure it right here, completed. And now we have successfully created our put command, so we're just going to steal these last two lines. And now we finished our create task function. So now let's go ahead and get started on this update task, and it's going to take in three values. It's going to take in the ID, the name, and completed. And we are going to use the update command for this. And this update command is actually going to need a few things. So it's going to need the table name again, which is just going to be tasks. It also needs a key, and this is how DynamoDB figures out what item to actually update. And so we're going to use the ID. And then again, we're going to need an expression attribute names. So expression attribute names. And once again, this is where we map name to name, because name is a keyword in DynamoDB. We also need something called an update expression. This is where we actually let DynamoDB know what values we want to update. So basically the :n and the :c could really be anything that we wanted them to be. It's essentially just a placeholder, and then here's where we're going to tell it what values we actually want to map it to. So we want :n to correspond with the name that we're passing into this function, and then we want :c to correspond with the completion status that we're passing in. And the last thing that we're going to need is returned values. And we're just going to set this to all new. And that is everything for our update function. We're just going to steal these two lines. Now let's go on to our delete. So it looks like I accidentally capitalized the D in delete task. So let's just go and fix that real quick. And thank God this function is a lot smaller. All it's going to take in is an ID, and we're not going to destructure that. And we are going to use the delete command. And it's just going to take in a table name again, which again is task, and it's going to also take in a key so it knows what item to delete. Okay, so that's everything for the delete command. So we're just going to go ahead and copy these two lines over again. And one thing that I'm noticing is this dot client is actually supposed to be dot client.send, so just like this. So go ahead and fix this for the other three places that we're using this line. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And we're officially done with this file. So let's go back to our index.js. And we're going to go into our app.get route. And we are just going to make a try and catch block. So just like this. And here's where we're going to use our helper functions that we just created. So we're going to go const tasks is equal to await fetch tasks. And we're just going to invoke that function. And now all we have to do is send that data back. So we're going to do res.send tasks.items. And then we're going to go inside this catch block now. And we want to send back an error code because Obviously it didn't work if we hit this catch block. So we're going to do res.status 400.send, and then we'll just put a meaningful message. So we'll just do something like error fetching tasks. And we still want to send back this actual error message, so we're going to add that error right here. And these other functions are going to follow a similar pattern, so I'm just going to copy this try catch block real quick just to make it a little bit quicker. And we're just going to do const task is equal to rec.body, because we're going to be sending in the task that we're going to use. And then we're going to want to use our create task function, so we're going to go const response is equal to await create tasks, and that'll import it for us. And in here we're going to pass in the tasks that we're going to create. Now we still have to send back our response, so let's do res.send response. And then for our error message, instead of error fetching tasks, error creating tasks. Okay, so let's go on to our update route, and we are just going to steal this try catch block once again. And this one's going to be actually even more similar, so we're just going to change this function to update tasks and change the error message to error updating tasks. And we are done with our update method. So let's go down to the delete route. So this route's actually going to use a parameter. So we're going to go /id. Now when you use a delete route, you actually can't pass in a body, or you're at least not supposed to. You're supposed to use parameters like this. So instead of doing this rec.body here, we're actually going to go id and rec.params. And then instead of calling update tasks, we're going to call delete tasks. And again, change the error message to update deleting tasks. So really the last thing we have to do is import serverless. We want to use this so we can deploy our API on a Lambda function, because Lambdas are serverless and technically Express uses a server. So go ahead and import serverless from serverless HTTP. And one thing that I'm noticing is that we're using the require method, which we don't want to use. So we're just going to change this real quick. So we're just going to go import Express and then remove this require, and we'll just go from Express. Just like that. And then we'll do the same thing over here. So we'll go import and now we have fixed our import statements. And let's go down here so we can actually use serverless. So at the bottom of this file, we're going to go export const handler is equal to serverless, and we're going to invoke this and pass in app. Now when we're using the serverless library, we can't actually use app.listen, but we still want to have the option to use it if we're running this locally. That's where our environment variable that we created in the package.json is going to come in handy. So we're going to go process.env.development, and then we are just going to put our app.listen inside of this. So basically what's happening here is if we run npm run dev, we're going to use our environment variable called development, and we're going to use app.listen so we can run it locally. But when we deploy it, we're going to use the command npm start, and that's going to use our app in serverless mode. And also I noticed a mistake in our delete route. We don't want to pass task in here. Task is undefined technically. We want to pass in the ID. And everything looks good now. And the last thing we're going to want to do is allow cores. So let's go up to the top and import that real quick. Now we only want to allow cores when we're developing locally. So we're going to take this if statement again and move it up to the top where our other middleware is. And in here we're just going to go app.use cores and invoke it. If we didn't have this line of code and we ran our ReactApp locally and our API locally, then we would get a cores error every time we tried to go and send a HTTP request from our ReactApp to our Express server. So that's why we need that. Now that our API is complete, we can go back to our ReactApp and finish up our API calls. So let's start by importing Axios. And basically that's just a tool that helps us send HTTP requests. Now we're also going to need to use state to help keep track of the tasks that we're going to fetch. And we're just going to set this to an empty array. Now we're also going to have to import our use state. So let's go ahead and do that. And I already know we're going to have to import a use effect, so we might as well just do that now. Now let's go ahead and get rid of this task because we're not going to need any fake data anymore because we're going to use the actual data that's coming from our API. So I'm going to go ahead and create a function called fetch tasks. And this is going to be an async function. And in this try catch block, we're going to actually fetch our data. So I'm going to go data axios.get, and then we are going to do set tasks data. And let's actually make this plural because it makes more sense. And when we make this axios.get call, we need to pass in the URL of our API as a parameter. Now we're not going to have the exact URL until we deploy our API, but for now I'm just going to go ahead and create a new file, and I'm just going to call it utils.js. And in here all we're going to have is export const API URL, and for now we're just going to put localhost 3001 /task. Now we can go back to our app.js and use our API URL. And then later when we actually have our real URL for our deployed API, we're just going to change that variable out. And in this catch block, we're just going to console.log the error. So now we have the function that's going to fetch our data for us. All we need to do now is just call it in a use effect. So I'm just going to use the snippet, delete all of this, and then just call the function right here. And we're just going to get rid of this dependency. This means that it's only going to call this function when the page first loads. Now down here you can see it's red, and that's because we got rid of the task that we had for mock data. And now the correct way to do it is to actually map over tasks. And we're just going to call our task component for every single task within the task list. And we need to pass it a few props, including the task itself. We need to give it a key because we're mapping. And the key is just going to be task.id. And then lastly, we just want to pass it the fetch tasks function. We can go ahead and get rid of this old task that we were just using for testing. And let's also go pass the fetch task function as a prop into the add task form. And this will make sense in a second. And I'm noticing one tiny mistake. We just need to add await before axios.get call. Now we can go finish up our add task form. And all we have to do is finish this add new task function. So it's going to be async. So let's go ahead and get rid of this. And we're just going to make a try catch block. We're also going to have to import Axios in this file as well. So same thing, import Axios from Axios. And then in this try block, we're going to go await axios.post. Again, we're going to use our API URL as the first parameter. And we're actually going to have a second parameter this time. And this is going to be the body that we're sending back to our API. So we're going to have to send it the name, which is going to be new task, and the completed status, which is always going to default to false. After our post is complete, we want to refetch the data so our list will update with the new task. So we're just going to call our fetch task function, because remember we passed this in as a prop earlier, and then we're just going to set new task to an empty string just so it clears out our input field. And then we just need to make sure that we add our fetch tasks up here so we can actually use it down below. And get rid of this. And then the last thing we need to do is just console log our error, just so we have an idea of what happens if something fails. And we're officially done with our add task form. Now let's move on to task.js. I'm just going to take this Axios import because I know we're going to need it. And I'm just going to do that first. Now we're going to fix up this handle update task completion. And this is going to be async. And we're going to add another try catch block. And we'll go ahead and move this set is complete in the try catch. And then we'll go await Axios.put because it's an update. And we're going to use our API URL again. And for the body for this one, we're going to want to send everything. So we're going to send the ID, the name, and the updated completion status, which is going to be the inverse of whatever is complete is currently. So just like that. And then in the catch block, we're just going to add a console log. Okay, so let's go and fix up our handle delete. This one's going to need to be async as well. Again, we're going to delete this, add our try catch block. We'll go ahead and do our Axios call right here, and this one's going to be .delete. And if you remember, our delete endpoint actually doesn't take in a body. We just need to append the ID to the URL. So we're just going to add task ID right here. And after we delete our task, we're going to want to refetch all of our tasks. So we're going to use our fetch task function that was passed in. So let's make sure it's here. Fetch tasks. And we can just go down here and invoke it now. So we're just going to await fetch tasks. And then let's go ahead and console log. And then the last thing we need to do in this file is actually pass the fetch tasks function into our update task form component. Now we are officially done with tasks.js. Let's move on to our last component called update task form. And let's make sure we're passing in the fetch task prop. And then we're going to create our function to help update the task name. So handle update task name. And this function is going to be async await as well. We're going to do another try catch block. And we're also going to have to import Axios as well. So now let's go ahead and finish our handle update task name function, and we're going to wait Axios.put, and we're going to pass in the API URL as the first parameter, and the second parameter we're going to want to pass in the whole task. So we're going to go name, task name, and finally completed. So the only thing we're actually going to update is the task name. That's why we have this right here. So after our update, we want to refresh our task data. So we're just going to do await fetch tasks. And then we'll clear out our form with set task name. And we'll just make this an empty string. So now let's go ahead and console log our error. Now we actually have to call our function. So let's take this and we're going to add it to our onClick handler for our submit button. We want this function to be async await though. Now we are officially done with all of our coding. The only thing we're going to have to go back and change is our API URL. Once we get our real URL from our deployed API, we're going to replace this, but we don't have to worry about that for now. Now we're going to need to push our code to GitHub to make our deployment a little bit easier later on. So we're just going to cd out of this app directory. Now when we're in this root directory, we're going to run the command git init. And if you start to run into any issues, it's probably because you didn't remove git from your React app. So make sure you go and do that. I showed this step at the beginning of the video. Now that our root directory is a Git repository, I'm going to go ahead and create a repo on GitHub. And we are just going to call this task list tutorial. And I'm just going to keep this public. And we're just going to create this repository. And we already ran the command git init, so I'm just going to steal everything else. Go back to our code, and now we're going to run the command git add dot, and now we're going to paste in those git commands we just copied over from GitHub. And we have successfully pushed our code to GitHub. Let's head over to AWS. So now I'm going to be showing you how to deploy a full stack application on AWS. One of the really nice things about deploying this way is that it's really inexpensive. So you can see I spend about $1.07 a month, and $1 of that is for my domain name for my personal website. And AWS Amplify, I have 3 React apps hosted on there, and I'm only getting charged 7 cents. So it's really inexpensive. So the 3 services that we're going to be using are DynamoDB to host our database, AWS Amplify to host our React app, and Lambda to host our API. So we're going to get started with DynamoDB. Now we're just going to head over to tables real quick and create a table. And we're going to make our table name called tasks. Our partition key is just going to be ID. And then we're going to leave everything else and create our table. So now we have successfully created our DynamoDB table. And if you notice, we never specified what our columns would be on our table. Once we start pushing items to our table, it's going to actually update those columns for us, so we don't have to do them beforehand. Now let's go and head over to Lambda. And we're just going to create a function. And I'm just going to call this task list API. And then we're going to go ahead and open advanced settings and click enable function URL. Auth type is going to be none. And then we're going to configure cores. And now we can just create our function. So the next step is to actually upload our code to our Lambda. So what I'm going to do is just open my API folder, and I'm going to make a zip file of all the contents of that folder. So now that I've successfully created my zip, I'm just going to go to upload from. And then I'm just going to select my zip file. Hit save. Now our code is successfully uploaded to our Lambda. We're going to want to go to configuration, and under function URL we're going to want to change a couple things. So go to edit, scroll down, and we're just going to go and allow all of this stuff. Typically you don't want to allow everything, you only want to allow what you need, but for the sake of this tutorial we're just going to go through this pretty quick. And under allow methods we're going to just click all. That's what the star means, is all, and just hit save. Now let's see if our Express server is working. So if we hit our function URL, we can see hello world, so perfect. But let's see what happens if we try to hit our task route, which is where we get our data from. This is basically saying that our Lambda function doesn't have permission to communicate with our DynamoDB, so we need to go and fix that. So we're going to head over to permissions, and we can see that we have permissions to use CloudWatch, but not for DynamoDB. So we're going to edit this role name right here. And now we're using a service called IAM, which allows us to manage permissions. And we're going to click into this policy name. And we're just going to edit this policy. Now we're going to go to Visual, Add Permissions, select Dynamo, and then we're just going to allow all. And then for resources, we're also going to select all. And like I said earlier, you typically don't want to give all permissions like that, but we just want to get through this quick right now. So you can see we've added Dynamo, save changes. Now if we go back to our function URL and we hit this task endpoint again, we get back an empty array, which is exactly what we want. So let's go back to AWS. So now that our API is successfully deployed, I'm going to copy the URL for our API, and I'm going to go ahead and use it in my ReactApp. So I'm just going to replace my API URL with the deployed version, and then add /task. Then I'm just going to remove this zip folder that we created, and I'm going to push my code to GitHub. Now let's go and deploy our front end. So we're going to go to Amplify. And I'm just going to create a new app. And we're going to click Host Web App, GitHub. Select the repo. Because I'm using a mono repo, I'm going to click this and just put in UI. Hit next. And in the past, I've ran into issues with this npm CI, so I typically like to just remove the C and just use npm install instead. Save that, hit next, save and deploy. Now it's provisioning resources for us. Then it's going to move on to the build stage, and when this is all green, it will finally be deployed, and we can check out our website on this URL right here. Okay, so it looks like our React app is finally deployed, so let's hit this URL and let's test it out. And let's create a task, and we can check off a task, edit a task, and we should be able to delete a task as well. Now if we want to see these items in our database, I'll show you how. So I'm just going to create another task real quick, go back to AWS, and we're going to go back to DynamoDB. Go to Tables, Tasks, Explore Table Items, and here's our table. And you can see we have 3 columns: ID, completed, and name. So we are successfully updating our database. So that is just about everything for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys found this tutorial helpful, please like and subscribe. It would mean a lot. Also, if you guys have any ideas for some future tutorials, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And I'll see you guys in the next one.